Now, many people think that because I do criminal defense work, that I can't stand watching TV shows or movies that deal with criminal lawyers because everything they do is wrong. And that's just not true. But I do have to watch those with a grain of salt and with an understanding that this is all fictionalized and this is not how it really works in day-to-day life. So one of the things that I see a lot, whether I'm watching true crime documentaries or interviews or news reports or just talking to people, that is a misconception, is this idea that innocent people don't plead guilty, right? You always hear this: if they were innocent, they never would have pled guilty to the crime. That's not true for a whole host of reasons, and that's what we're talking about today. So stick around and let's chat about that. Happy Friday, everybody. Hope you're having a great week and gearing up for another awesome weekend. And I just realized I literally start every video saying the same thing. That's okay. It's good to have a routine. So today we are talking about guilty pleas, and it's kind of an unfortunate discussion because it's certainly not the way the system should work. But like I have told you guys before in other videos, the point of these videos is not to explain to you how the system should work. It's to try to give you some type of insight in how the system really does work, so that if, God forbid, you're ever in a situation where you're dealing with a criminal charge or you know somebody that is, you'll be armed with at least a little bit of information about what to expect. So this week we're talking about guilty pleas. Now, when an individual is charged with a crime, typically speaking, there are only three different ways that case can be resolved. The first way is through a dismissal. So if the prosecutor just decides, for whatever reason, I'm no longer going to bring this case, I can't prove it, I've lost a witness, what have you, and they just decide to dismiss the charges against you. That's option one. Option two is the most common, which is some type of plea agreement, whether that's a plea of guilt to the charged offense, a plea of guilt to a lesser included offense, a no contest plea, what have you, but it's some type of plea agreement. That is by far the most common way these cases get resolved. And then the third, which I've done a series of videos on, is trial. So there is no agreement. There is no agreement between the defendant and the state. And so they go to trial and the state is forced to prove the case beyond a reasonable doubt to a jury. So today we're focusing on that plea agreement stage. Now, I've worked many cases and I've seen news stories of cases that 5 years after the fact, 10 years after the fact, 20 years after the fact, the person is trying to undo or set aside a conviction, and they're saying that I was not actually guilty of this offense. However, they entered a plea of guilt. And so the sort of sentiment that you hear from the people that don't work in this industry is that, well, if they weren't guilty, surely they wouldn't have pled guilty. No innocent person would plead guilty to an offense they're not guilty of. I know if I were charged with a crime, I would never plead guilty if I wasn't in fact guilty. Well, unfortunately, that's not always the case. And again, this is not a conversation about what is an ideal situation or not how the system should work, but it's just a conversation about what actually happens. When somebody is charged with a crime, specifically charged with a significant crime, i.e. a felony, a first-degree felony or a federal felony, the amount of stress and pressure on that individual is immense. And the amount of risk associated with defending that type of allegation is immense. Even if a person is 100% innocent, they have to recognize the fact that they will be trusting 12 strangers that they've never met, that they don't really get to pick. Go watch my video on jury selection for kind of an idea on how that works. They don't get to pick. They will be trusting that they will make the correct decision that will impact me for the rest of my life, for potentially 50, 60, 70 years in some sentence cases. That is a very big ask. In 2024, social media is rampant. We have kind of unprecedented access to the way that other everyday individuals think, feel, act, and they go about their daily lives. That can be sometimes somewhat scary, because what social media has shown us is that there are a whole lot of people in the world and in our area that don't necessarily think like we do, that don't necessarily look at things the same way that we do. And so the idea that 12 people who just randomly answered a jury summons on any given day are going to be deciding your fate is incredibly scary. And so when you are faced with a decision of, do I take control of the outcome by entering a plea that I don't necessarily want to enter, but I know what the consequences will be. I know what the sentence will be. I know what the collateral consequences will be. And that is, to some people, a much more enticing option than this massive, massive risk of not knowing exactly what's going to happen. And it could be exponentially worse than whatever the plea agreement is, right? The other concern, and again, this is not great. It's not good that this is a concern for many people, but it just simply is the financial concern. Trials, to hire a private attorney to take a case to trial, is expensive, incredibly expensive. You're talking, especially for felonies, you're talking minimum tens of thousands of dollars just for the legal fees. That's not inclusive of experts or any of this other stuff. So trials are very expensive, and they can go up to, you hear stories of on these high profile murder cases, some of the lawyers charging $1.5 to $2.5 million in legal fees just for their time in trying the case. And so trials are simply incredibly expensive, and far too expensive for some people to be able to afford. And so now, not only are they faced with the choice of, do I take a predetermined, a set outcome, or do I risk trial? But if I'm risking trial, it's with a public defender who may be very good. Don't get me wrong. There are some phenomenal lawyers that do appointed work, but it's kind of like a lottery. You don't get to choose what lawyer is appointed to you. The court simply appoints the next one on the list. You could get an amazing lawyer who is just doing, appointed cases as his pro bono way of giving back to society. I take appointed cases all the time for that reason. Or you could get some lawyer that just doesn't really know what they're doing. They're only doing this because they really want to try to gain some experience, and they are just going to be far outclassed by your specific case. That's a risk. That's a huge risk that people have to encounter. And so a lot of times when they weigh those risks, there are two ways that they look at it. I usually tell people there's the principle of the matter, what is right and what is wrong at its core level. But then there's the cost-benefit analysis of what makes the most sense for you as an individual and your future. And only that individual can make that decision. To some people, they say, look, my morals will never be compromised. I'm not going to plead guilty to something I didn't do. I understand the risks. I understand the costs, but I will not be able to live with myself if I don't go down fighting. I'm going to go to trial. And to that, I have the utmost absolute respect for that decision. I will fight for them every single step of the way. I'm in their corner. I will do everything in my power to make sure that the right result is reached. But to some people, they say, look, I understand that I'm not guilty of this offense. I really am not. But the risks are too high. The costs are too high. I can't afford to put my family through a trial. I can't afford to put my children through a trial. Simply get me the best deal possible, and I will just readily take that guilty plea, even though I know I shouldn't. And to that, I have the utmost respect. I have the utmost support. And I will say, I will do everything in my power to get you the very best deal possible and move you through this in as quick and as an efficient way as possible, because that's it. I understand where that mindset comes from. So again, next time you see somebody on the news, next time you see somebody on a TV show, next time you hear somebody in casual conversation, try to say, well, an innocent person would never have pled guilty. Push back on that. That's not necessarily true. Now, I'd love for us as a society to be working towards a way for that to be the case, that an innocent person never has to plead guilty because they have the system that is behind them, ready to support them and ready to help prove their innocence. But that's simply not where we are yet. So as of now, people plead guilty all the time who are not necessarily guilty of what they are charged with. So I hope this was at least a little bit helpful. I hope it was a little bit informative. As always, if you have any questions about this or anything else, please feel free to reach out to me. Stop by my live stream on Wednesdays and Sunday nights over on Twitch. The address is below in the video description. I look forward to seeing you over there. I look forward to seeing you back here next Friday. And until I do, I want everybody out there to be good and stay on the right side of the bars.